The weight of measured fire. The M1 carbine feels lighter than usual in Audie Murphy's hands as he crouches behind the crumbling stone wall of a bombed-out farmhouse near Holtzwihr, France. January 1945 has brought bitter cold and desperate German counterattacks to the Vosges Mountains, and now the sharp crack of rifle fire echoes from the valley below, where 2nd Squad walked into what should have been a routine patrol. Murphy can see muzzle flashes winking from the tree line 400 yards out. Too far for most weapons, but not impossible for careful shooting. The trapped men are pinned in a shallow depression with no cover except frozen earth, and the bodies of 2 comrades who didn't make it to ground fast enough. Private First Class Danny Kowalski shifts beside Murphy, his M1 Garand trembling slightly in his grip. The kid from Detroit has been with the 3rd Infantry Division since Sicily, but his face still goes pale when the machine gun starts its rhythmic chatter. The sound carries differently in winter air, sharper and more brittle than the heavy summer fire they remember from Italy. 400 yards is too far for that pop gun, Murphy mutters, adjusting his grip on the carbine. But Kowalski knows better than to argue when Murphy gets that look in his eyes, the one that appeared somewhere between the Gothic line and the frozen foxholes of eastern France. Staff Sergeant Murphy arrived at this observation post 20 minutes ago with the remainder of his platoon, ordered to establish overwatch while the company regrouped after 3 days of grinding advances through Alsatian villages. Lieutenant Patterson had seemed confident during the morning briefing, spreading his map across the tailgate of a jeep and pointing to phased lines with a gloved finger. The patrol below had been checking for enemy movement along the Ill River when German infantry, likely a reinforced squad with at least 1 machine gun, caught them in open ground. Radio contact died immediately. Either equipment failure or the radio operator took a hit. Now 8 men lie trapped in that depression, while enemy fire keeps them pressed flat against the frozen earth. Murphy watches through his field glasses as Sergeant Williams tries to wave his men toward better cover, only to duck back down as bullets crack overhead. The Vosges Mountains have a way of swallowing sound and magnifying others. Murphy can hear individual rifle shots, the mechanical stutter of the MG-42, and underneath it all, the wind moving through bare branches. What he can't hear are the voices of the trapped men, though he knows they're calling for help, calling for their mothers, or simply calling out names of friends who will never answer. Lieutenant wants to wait for artillery, Kowalski whispers, nodding toward Patterson's position behind them. The officer is hunched over his radio, speaking in clipped tones to battalion. 20 minutes, maybe 30, before the first rounds arrive. Those men don't have 30 minutes. Murphy studies the enemy positions through his field glasses, noting the disciplined fire control and overlapping fields of fire. These aren't desperate Volkssturm conscripts throwing away ammunition. They're experienced soldiers who know their business, probably veterans of the Russian front who understand how to use terrain and patience to maximum effect. The machine gun team has positioned itself to sweep the entire depression, while riflemen cover the flanks from concealed positions among the bare trees. Any attempt to rush across that open ground would be suicide. Murphy knows this with the certainty of a man who has seen too many good soldiers die trying to be heroes. But he also knows that 8 men in that depression are running out of time, running out of hope, and running out of luck. The M1 carbine isn't designed for this kind of precision work. Its 30 caliber cartridge lacks the power and range of the standard M1 Garand, and most soldiers consider it suitable only for close quarters fighting. But Murphy has always preferred the lighter weapon for its quick handling and manageable recoil. He's spent countless hours practicing what the training manuals call measured fire, deliberate, aimed shots rather than rapid bursts. At 400 yards, with iron sights and a steady rest, it might be possible. Not to eliminate the enemy position, that would take a squad of marksmen with proper equipment, but to make them uncomfortable enough to shift positions, to reduce their rate of fire, to create doubt. Murphy moves to the corner of the farmhouse foundation where fallen stones create a natural shooting rest. The carbine's rear sight clicks to its maximum setting as he settles into position, conscious that he's about to attempt something that contradicts every tactical manual he's ever read. If stories like this make you imagine what you'd do under fire, tell us in the comments how you think you'd react in this situation, and stay with us for the next chapters. One man with a light rifle cannot suppress an entrenched enemy position. Murphy learned this fact in basic training, reinforced it in North Africa, and proved it true across Sicily and Italy. But one man might create enough uncertainty to give 8 trapped soldiers a chance to move. Sometimes the impossible becomes necessary when the alternative is watching good men die. The first shot targets the muzzle flash of what appears to be the machine gun position. The carbine barks, its report lost in the echo of enemy fire, and Murphy works the bolt smoothly, already shifting aim to a secondary target. The key is patience. Measured fire means each shot must count, each bullet placed with deliberate intent rather than sprayed in the general direction of trouble. Kowalski crawls closer, his Garand ready to join the fight, but Murphy raises a hand to stop him. "Different positions," he whispers. "Make them think there's more of us than there is." The young soldier nods and belly crawls toward a gap in the wall 30 yards away. He understands the game they're playing, even if he doesn't fully believe it can work. The effect develops slowly. Enemy fire slackens slightly as soldiers seek better cover or try to locate this new threat. Murphy continues his methodical shooting, using every trick learned in 2 years of combat, shooting from different positions to confuse enemy observers, timing his shots to coincide with distant artillery explosions from other sectors, varying his rate of fire to suggest multiple weapons. The carbine grows warm in his hands as he burns through clip after clip. Lieutenant Patterson appears beside Murphy's position, keeping low behind the stone wall. His map case is muddy, and his radio handset crackles with static. "Battalion says 15 minutes for artillery," he reports. "Can you keep this up?" Murphy doesn't answer immediately, focused on placing another shot toward a rifle position that's been particularly active. When he finally speaks, his voice carries no emotion, just the flat certainty of someone calculating ammunition against time. "Long as I've got bullets and they stay put. And if they don't stay put, if they decide to flank us, then we'll know in a hurry." The Vosges Mountains have seen this kind of fighting for months now. Small unit actions in frozen forests where artillery coordinates mean little and radio communications fade in and out like bad dreams. The 3rd Infantry Division has learned to fight with what they have, where they are, against an enemy who knows the terrain and fights with the desperation of men defending their homeland. Through his field glasses, Patterson watches the trapped squad. Sergeant Williams is trying to organize some kind of movement, gesturing toward a slight fold in the ground that might provide better cover. But every time one of his men lifts his head, the machine gun starts chattering again, kicking up frozen earth and forcing them back down. "They can't stay there much longer," Patterson mutters, more to himself than to Murphy. "The cold will get them, even if the bullets don't." Murphy knows this too. January in eastern France is unforgiving to men lying motionless on frozen ground. Hypothermia kills as surely as machine gun fire, just more quietly and with less drama. The trapped soldiers are probably already losing feeling in their fingers and toes, their reactions slowing as their core temperatures drop. Kowalski's Garand barks from his new position, and Murphy sees him work the action smoothly before shifting to another firing point. The kid is learning, adapting to the rhythm of this strange dance they're performing. Fire, move, fire again from somewhere else. Create the illusion of strength where only stubborn desperation exists. The enemy fire becomes less coordinated. Soldiers begin moving between positions, creating brief targets of opportunity. The machine gun falls silent for longer periods, its crew either relocating or taking more careful aim. Murphy allows himself a moment of cautious optimism. Not that they're winning, but that they might be creating enough confusion to matter. 20 minutes stretch into an eternity, measured in individual trigger pulls. Murphy's world narrows to the Carbine's front sight, the rhythm of breathing and aiming, and the distant figures of his trapped comrades. His shoulders ache from maintaining shooting positions, and his fingers grow numb despite wool gloves. The radio crackles with updates from other positions along the line. Dog Company reports movement to the north, and Easy Company is requesting ammunition resupply. The Vosges Mountains echo with the sounds of a dozen small battles, each fought by cold, tired men who want nothing more than to see another sunrise. Murphy listens with half his attention while maintaining his careful rhythm of fire. "Murphy," Patterson calls softly. "Battalion wants to know your ammunition status." "Half my load, maybe less," Murphy replies without taking his eye from the sight. His voice carries the strain of sustained concentration. The Carbine has been his companion through Sicily and Anzio, across the beaches of southern France, and into these frozen hills, but he's never asked this much of it before. Kowalski slides back toward their position, keeping low behind the broken wall. His face is flushed with cold and exertion, but his movements remain controlled. "I count at least 6 positions over there," he reports. "Maybe 8. They're good at staying hidden. The trapped squad below has stopped trying to move." Sergeant Williams and his men lie pressed against the frozen earth, occasionally returning fire when they spot a target, but mostly just enduring. Murphy can see their breath steaming in the cold air, small puffs of vapor that reveal their positions to any German with patience and good eyes. "Artillery's coming," Patterson says, checking his watch. 5 more minutes, maybe 10. But Murphy knows that artillery is a blunt instrument, and their friends are caught in the same target area as the enemy. Danger close has a specific meaning in the manual. In reality, it means hoping the shells land on the other guys. Through his field glasses, Murphy watches a German soldier move between positions in the tree line. The man is careful, professional, probably a veteran of multiple campaigns. For a moment, their eyes might have met across 400 yards of winter air, 2 soldiers doing jobs they never asked for, in a place neither of them calls home. The weight of the Carbine feels different now, heavier despite its light construction. Murphy has fired more rounds in the past 30 minutes than in some entire engagements, each shot carefully placed, each target deliberately chosen. His right shoulder throbs from the repeated recoil, and his trigger finger has developed a steady ache. "You ever wonder what you'll tell your kids about this?" Kowalski asks during a brief lull in the firing. The question hangs in the cold air between them, mixing with the cordite smoke and the smell of winter. Murphy considers this while reloading another clip. What would he tell them? That he spent an afternoon trying to convince a German machine gun crew to relocate, that 8 men stayed alive because one soldier decided 400 yards wasn't too far for measured fire, that sometimes the impossible becomes routine when the alternative is unacceptable. "Tell them it was cold," Murphy finally answers. "Tell them we did what we had to do." The German fire has definitely slackened, but it hasn't stopped. The machine gun still chats occasionally, and rifle fire continues from multiple positions. Murphy realizes that he's not winning this engagement in any conventional sense. He's simply prolonging it, turning a quick massacre into a slower, more expensive proposition for the enemy. Lieutenant Patterson moves between positions, checking on his men and coordinating with battalion. His radio conversations are brief and professional, but Murphy can hear the tension underneath. Officers live with different pressures than enlisted men. They carry responsibility for decisions that other people implement, for plans that rarely survive contact with reality. The Vosges Mountains have taught them all hard lessons about the gap between tactical theory and tactical reality. Maps don't show how sound carries in frozen air, or how winter light plays tricks with range estimation. Radio frequencies that work perfectly in training become unreliable when filtered through enemy jamming and atmospheric interference. But the mountains have also taught them about persistence, about the strange mathematics of small unit combat, where one determined soldier can sometimes accomplish what a company cannot. Murphy understands this instinctively, even if he couldn't explain it to a staff college instructor. The carbine barrel is warm enough now that snow melts when it touches the metal. Murphy has fired more than 60 rounds, each one aimed with deliberate care, each one part of a larger pattern designed to create doubt in enemy minds. Would you follow the orders exactly, or trust what your own eyes and instincts tell you in a moment like this? Comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. When the first artillery rounds arrive, they fall like thunder made visible, erupting in geysers of earth and snow among the German positions. Murphy continues shooting through the barrage, using the covering noise to move between firing points and confuse enemy observers. The trapped squad uses the chaos to bound backward in short rushes, each man covering the next in textbook infantry movement. But the artillery is walking too close to Sergeant Williams' position. Murphy watches through his field glasses as explosions bracket the shallow depression, showering the trapped men with debris. One round lands close enough to lift bodies off the ground, and when the smoke clears, Murphy counts only 6 men moving instead of 8. "Artillery, cease fire!" Patterson shouts into his radio handset. "Cease fire! We've got friendlies in the impact area!" The response crackles back through static, confirming the order, but Murphy knows the damage is done. Good men died from friendly fire, killed by their own side's attempt to help them. The German machine gun opens up again as soon as the artillery stops, raking the depression with renewed fury. Williams and his remaining men are pinned down again, but now they're closer to Murphy's position, maybe 300 yards instead of 400. The mathematics of aimed fire have improved, but the tactical situation remains desperate. Kowalski appears beside Murphy, his face grim. "2 men down from our own shells," he reports. "Williams is hit but still moving. They've got maybe 1 more bound in them before the Germans figure out their route." Murphy makes a decision that will haunt his dreams for decades. Instead of providing covering fire from the safety of the stone wall, he stands up, not completely exposed, but visible enough to draw attention, presenting himself as a target to pull German fire away from the retreating squad. The effect is immediate. Rifle bullets crack past his position, forcing him to duck and weave, but the machine gun swings toward him instead of tracking Williams' men. Murphy fires back rapidly now, abandoning the careful measured fire for sustained suppression. The carbine heats up in his hands, its metal parts expanding with the repeated firing. "Get down!" Kowalski screams, but Murphy ignores him. This is the moment that will be written up in after-action reports, the impossible act that transforms Staff Sergeant Murphy into a name in history books. But from inside the action, it feels like simple arithmetic. His life against 6 others, his risk against their certainty of death. The German fire concentrates on his position now, chipping fragments from the stone wall and kicking up dirt around his feet. Murphy moves constantly, firing from different points along the farmhouse foundation, using rubble and shadow to break up his silhouette. The carbine is so hot now that he has to shift his grip to avoid burns, but he keeps shooting. Through the chaos, he watches Williams and the surviving men make their final bound towards safety. They move with the desperate speed of soldiers who know they're out of chances, carrying their wounded and leaving nothing behind for the enemy. Murphy provides covering fire until they disappear into a fold of ground that will lead them back to friendly lines. Only then does he allow himself to duck back behind the wall, his ammunition nearly exhausted and his hands shaking from adrenaline and cold. The German fire continues for several more minutes, as if the enemy cannot quite believe that one man with a light rifle held their attention for so long. Lieutenant Patterson crawls over to Murphy's position, his face showing a mixture of awe and concern. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the craziest," he says. "Maybe both." Murphy doesn't answer immediately. He's listening to the sounds of the Vosges Mountains returning to their winter silence. broken only by distant rifle fire from other sectors. The carbine feels impossibly heavy in his hands now, its weight somehow multiplied by what he's asked it to do. The official record will note that accurate rifle fire from an unknown position disrupted enemy operations and enabled the patrol's successful withdrawal. No mention will be made of the impossibility of what happened. One soldier with a light rifle accomplishing what should have required a squad of marksmen with proper equipment. But Murphy knows the truth that won't appear in any citation. He was terrified the entire time. Terrified of dying, terrified of failing, terrified of the moment when the carbine would jam, or his ammunition would run out, or his nerve would break. The legend that others will create from this afternoon will never capture the taste of copper fear in his mouth or the way his hands trembled as he reloaded. The secret that Murphy will carry for the rest of his life is simpler and more terrible than anyone who reads the citation will understand. For 17 minutes, while providing covering fire for Williams' withdrawal, he wanted to run. Not just once, but continuously. A steady current of panic that he fought with each shot, each movement between firing positions, each moment of standing exposed to draw enemy fire away from his comrades. The carbine had jammed twice during those 17 minutes, once when the bolt rode over a cartridge instead of chambering it properly, and once when carbon buildup from rapid firing caused a failure to extract. Both times, Murphy found himself crouched behind inadequate cover with an inoperable weapon, while German bullets searched for him among the rubble. Kowalski witnessed the second jam and the 30 seconds of frantic field stripping that followed. He watched Murphy's face during those moments when death seemed certain and escape impossible, saw the raw terror that the official reports would never mention. Years later, in a bar in Detroit, Kowalski would try to explain to friends that heroes aren't fearless. They're more afraid than anyone else, but they keep functioning anyway. The mathematics of ammunition had become desperate near the end. Murphy fired his last full clip at the machine gun position, then scrounged partially loaded clips from fallen weapons around the farmhouse. His final shots came from a clip containing only 3 rounds, each one chosen with the care of a man who understands he has no margin for error. Lieutenant Patterson's radio conversations with Battalion told a different story than what Murphy experienced. The official version spoke of effective suppressive fire from defensive positions and successful extraction under covering fire. No mention of 17 minutes that felt like 17 hours, or of the moment when Murphy seriously considered abandoning his position and running for the rear. The truth was that Williams and his men survived not because of heroic action, but because of heroic persistence. The grinding, unglamorous refusal to quit when quitting would have been rational, justifiable, and probably unnoticed by anyone in position to pass judgment. When the German fire finally slackened and then stopped, Murphy found himself alone behind the stone wall with an empty carbine and hands that shook too badly to reload. The enemy had withdrawn to better positions, probably assuming they faced a much larger force than one soldier with a light rifle and more stubbornness than sense. The Vosges Mountains returned to their winter quiet, broken only by the distant sound of Williams' squad moving through the forest toward friendly lines. Murphy sat among the rubble and tried to process what had happened, tried to reconcile the clean, tactical picture in his mind with the messy reality of fear and luck and bullets that missed by inches instead of feet. Kowalski appeared beside him, offering a canteen of water that tasted like metal and medicinal tablets. "They're going to write this up, you know," he said quietly. "Make it sound like something from the movies." Murphy accepted the water gratefully, using it to wash the taste of cordite and fear from his mouth. Wasn't like the movies. No, it wasn't. They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to Lieutenant Patterson coordinate the squad's return and request a situation report from Battalion. The officer's voice carried the relief of someone whose worst fears had not materialized, whose men were coming home instead of being listed as casualties in the next morning's report. The carbine lay across Murphy's knees, its barrel still warm from sustained firing. He had asked more of the weapon than its designers intended, and it had responded with mechanical reliability that seemed almost miraculous in retrospect. But the miracle wasn't in the rifle. It was in the 17 minutes when fear and duty fought each other to a draw, and duty won just often enough to matter. Murphy understood that this afternoon would follow him for the rest of his life, not as a source of pride, but as a weight he would carry alone. The citation would speak of courage and devotion to comrades, but it could never capture the private knowledge of his own terror or the randomness that separated heroism from catastrophe. Years later, the smell of winter air and the sound of metal on metal would bring it all back. The 17 minutes when he discovered that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to function despite being afraid. The after-action report, filed 3 days later from a warm office in a requisitioned French farmhouse, reduced Murphy's 17 minutes to 2 paragraphs of military prose. Staff Sergeant Murphy employed effective suppressive fire against superior enemy forces, enabling the successful withdrawal of 8 personnel under contact. The language was precise, professional, and completely inadequate to capture what actually happened behind the stone wall. Captain Morrison, the company commander, had asked Murphy to review the report before submission. He sat across from him at a wooden table, covered with maps and radio schedules, a cup of real coffee steaming between them, a luxury that seemed impossible after the frozen afternoon near Holtzwihr. "Anything you want to add?" Morrison asked, his pen poised over the typewritten pages. Murphy read through the tactical summary, the ammunition expenditure estimates, and the recommended commendation, finding no errors in fact and no truth in emphasis. "Looks complete, sir," Murphy replied, though he knew the report was actually empty of everything that mattered. The fear, the doubt, the 17 minutes when training and terror fought each other in his chest. None of that appeared in the clean sentences that would become part of division records. Kowalski had been transferred to another platoon the day after the action, a routine personnel move that felt less than routine to Murphy. Their final conversation had been brief, conducted over breakfast rations, heated on a pocket stove, but it carried the weight of shared experience that would connect them across whatever distance the war imposed. "You going to tell people what it was really like?" Kowalski had asked, stirring powdered coffee with a dirty spoon. "You think they'd believe it? I think they'd prefer the version in the report." Murphy understood this instinctively. People needed heroes, but they needed them clean and uncomplicated, the version where courage feels like courage, where the right choice is obvious, where good men perform extraordinary acts without drowning in their own fear. The 17 minutes of private terror served no purpose except to burden those who experienced them. Lieutenant Patterson received a commendation for tactical leadership during the engagement. Sergeant Williams recovered from his wounds and returned to duty 6 weeks later, carrying shrapnel in his left leg that would ache during cold weather for the rest of his life. The 2 men killed by friendly artillery were posthumously awarded Bronze Stars and buried in a military cemetery outside Epinal. The 3rd Infantry Division continued its advance through the Vosges Mountains, fighting for villages with unpronounceable names against an enemy that retreated slowly and expensively. Murphy carried his carbine through the remainder of the winter campaign, but he never again asked it to perform the impossible. The weapon had given him everything it had during 17 minutes behind a stone wall. Demanding more seemed ungrateful. Years later, in a different war fought by different men, a combat correspondent would interview Murphy about his most famous actions. They would sit in a hotel room in San Antonio, with air conditioning humming and traffic sounds drifting through closed windows, while Murphy tried to explain what courage actually feels like to someone who had never needed to find out. "People think it's about not being afraid," Murphy would tell the correspondent, "but that's backwards. It's about being afraid and staying anyway. The reporter would ask about specific actions, specific medals, specific moments that transformed a farm boy from Texas into a symbol of American courage. Murphy would answer carefully, honestly, but always with the awareness that the true story, the 17 minutes of terror behind the stone wall, served no purpose except to complicate a narrative that people needed to be simple. The M1 Carbine sits now in a museum display case, labeled with dates and locations that mark its journey through the European theater. Visitors read the placard and learn about effective range, ammunition capacity, and the practical advantages of a lightweight rifle for mobile infantry operations. They don't learn about 17 minutes when one soldier asked the weapon to bridge the gap between tactical theory and tactical reality, or about the hands that shook too badly to reload when the shooting finally stopped. The weight of that afternoon settled into Murphy's memory like sediment, accumulating layers of meaning that had nothing to do with citations or commendations. He carried it through the remainder of the war, through the years that followed, through a lifetime of people who wanted to hear about heroism, but couldn't bear to hear about the price. In the end, that was the real secret. Not what he had done, but what it had cost him to do it. The legend the world remembers is lighter than the memory the man carried, and the difference between them is measured in 17 minutes when fear and duty fought each other to a draw, and duty won just often enough to matter. If this story reminded you that behind every medal there's a human being carrying memories we'll never fully see, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.